At exactly 37 seconds, Trump slammed the table, pointed like a loaded gun, and snarled, "Take an IQ test. I dare you." Laughter rippled. Cameras snapped. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She slid a 60-year-old envelope across the marble like it was a live grenade. What secret was buried deep enough to make a billionaire choke on his own dare on live TV? The hearing had barely started when it happened. 37 seconds in, Donald Trump leaned in like a wolf over fresh meat, slammed his palm on the table, and snapped, "I dare her to take an IQ test." His voice cracked like a whip across the chamber. The words didn't echo, they detonated. Every head in the room snapped toward Jasmine Crockett. You could hear the rustle of jackets, the click of pens, the sharp inhale of staffers too afraid to exhale. On the broadcast feed, the Chiron froze. CNN cut the B-roll. MSNBC switched to full frame. Even Fox stopped spinning, all lenses locked in like sniper scopes. Trump didn't blink. He grinned wide like he'd just sucker-punched democracy on live TV. Marjorie Taylor Greene chuckled into her palm. Jim Jordan leaned back like he was watching halftime at a blood sport. Eric Trump whispered something smug and stupid under his breath, something like "game over." And then Jasmine moved. No flinch, no blink, no rage. Just the calm of a woman who's been underestimated too many damn times to care anymore. Her hands slid under her stack of documents, slow and steady, like she was pulling a blade from velvet. And what she pulled out wasn't a comeback. It was a plain white envelope, sealed, silent, heavy like a storm cloud over dry brush. She laid it on the table in front of her, deliberate, centered, quiet. And suddenly the room felt colder. She didn't say a word, didn't need to, because sometimes you don't respond with fire, you respond with fuse. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just hold the floor, she owned the damn battlefield. The question was no longer if she'd answer his dare. It was when the explosion would come and how hard it would hit. The envelope sat there like a sleeping landmine, white, untouched, waiting. Trump glanced at it once dismissively, then leaned back in his chair like the king of a collapsing empire, eyes scanning the room for applause that never came. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't even lift her gaze. Instead, with the calm precision of someone timing the tide, she leaned forward toward the clerk and spoke soft, level, lethal. "I'd like to move my questioning to the end of the session." For a split second, the entire room short-circuited. Reporters exchanged glances. Green's pen froze mid-scrawl. Even the chairman blinked, lips parting as if he'd misheard. Trump, meanwhile, let out a sharp breath, his smirk curling like spoiled milk. "She's got nothing," he scoffed loud enough for the cameras. But the cameras weren't listening to him anymore. They were zoomed in tight on Jasmine's hand, resting atop the envelope like it was a detonator. Still, composed, unshakable. That hand didn't tremble. It pressed down like it was holding history in place, daring it to rise too soon. Behind her, two aides moved, no panic, no words, just motion. One disappeared into a side door. The other pulled out a black folio with the slow reverence of someone handling a verdict. No one noticed yet, but Jasmine knew they would. Timing was everything, and in that stillness, deafening electric, Jasmine Crockett rewrote the rules. She refused the bait, she declined the drama, and in doing so, she didn't lose the spotlight. She became it. The question now wasn't whether she'd speak, it was what on earth she was waiting to unleash. The tension didn't ease. It calcified. The chairman adjusted his mic, cleared his throat, and spoke with the stiffness of a man reading a warning label on live explosives. "Today's hearing will focus on academic credentials and the role of truth in campaign integrity," he announced. The words landed like dry kindling, neutral, procedural, yet somehow soaked in gasoline. Trump barely reacted. He lounged back like a showman waiting for his next cue. His hands, steepled eyes half-lidded, the smirk returning to its perch. To him, this was theater, and he thought he was still the star. But across the room, Jasmine Crockett lifted her gaze. It wasn't fire in her eyes. It was ice, precise, surgical, the kind of cold that cracks glass before anyone hears it break. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She looked through Trump, not at him like someone studying a lie that had finally stopped moving. Trump noticed. His shoulders stiffened just a little. His eyes darted quick, twitchy. The arrogance didn't vanish, but it slipped like a suit that no longer fit. 1,000 viewers at home saw it, and Jasmine saw them seeing it. She didn't speak yet. She let the silence stretch thin and sharp until the air itself started to hum. Then, calm as a surgeon lifting a scalpel, she leaned slightly forward and whispered a single sentence, not to the chairman, not to the room, but to the millions watching through glass. What kind of man invites a test and forgets he already failed it? It wasn't a question. It was a countdown. And the clock had just started ticking. The room hadn't moved since her last line. It didn't breathe. It waited like a match suspended over dry wood. Jasmine Crockett sat still, eyes fixed, her voice as cool as the steel beneath courtroom marble. "Mr. Trump," she said, slow and deliberate, since academic records are central to today's hearing, "would you be willing to share your SAT scores with this committee?" Trump's reaction came fast, too fast. He puffed up like a rooster on cable news shoulders, back grin spreading like oil across water. "Absolutely," he said, louder than necessary. "I've said it before, I'm proud of my scores. Very proud. I've got one of the highest IQs, probably higher than anyone here." He chuckled at his own punchline, glancing toward his allies, like a boy showing off at recess. Jim Jordan laughed first, then Green leaned in with that crooked smile of hers. Even Eric, lounging behind a pad he hadn't written on all morning, smirked like the question had been a layup. But Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't blink. Her stillness wasn't passive, it was pressure, like the seconds before a detonator clicks. So just to confirm for the record, she said evenly, "You're happy to release your standardized testing history to this committee?" Trump nodded, proud as a peacock in heat. "Sure. I've got nothing to hide. Nothing." The cameras caught everything, his grin, the nod, the confidence. And somewhere beneath Jasmine's folder, history began to move. Because she wasn't asking for permission. She was tightening the snare. And the man who thought he'd set the trap had already stepped into it. The moment Trump said, "I've got nothing to hide," Jasmine reached forward, slow, controlled, like she was drawing the final card in a game she'd already won. Her fingers slid under the envelope. The paper made the faintest sound as it was pulled free, like the hiss before a fuse catches flame. It was yellowed with age edges, crisp, stamped in fading blue ink. She laid it on the table beneath the overhead camera. The room leaned in without moving. "This," she said, her voice low and surgical, "is an official document from the New York Military Academy, dated May 10th, 1964. Her thumb pressed against the paper like it was holding back an avalanche. "It states that Cadet Donald J. Trump did not appear for his scheduled SAT examination on May the 2nd. No explanation was provided. No request to reschedule was ever filed." The room went dead silent. Not still dead. Like breath had been stolen. Staffers blinked without realizing. Phones stopped recording midair. Across the aisle, aides shuffled their notes without purpose, trying to look busy in a moment too heavy for motion. On live television, the network anchors stopped speaking entirely. Then came the crack in the silence. Marjorie Taylor Greene hissed through clenched teeth, "Fabrication." She didn't shout it. She spat it like the truth burned her tongue. Jim Jordan whispered something only the devil would smile at. But the letter was real. The signature was verified. And Donald Trump, who dared a woman to take a test, was now facing proof he never showed up for his own. And the envelope still wasn't empty. Not yet. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she tapped once on her tablet, just once, and the monitor on the chamber wall flickered to life. Static. Then the grainy image of an old man appeared, lying in a hospital bed, thin as parchment, eyes like glass marbles that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. His voice cracked like brittle wood. "My name is Robert Steedman," he began, slow and steady, each word landing like a stone dropped into silence. "In 1964, I was paid $1,000 by Fred Trump to take the SAT exam for his son Donald." The gallery froze. You could hear someone's pen fall. Green stiffened like a coiled wire. Jim Jordan shifted in his chair. Eric Trump turned visibly pale. Steedman continued, unblinking. "I wore his cadet uniform. I signed his name. I took the test. And for nearly 60 years, I kept that secret. But the truth doesn't die just because people want it buried." His voice faded out. The screen dimmed. The silence returned, but this time it screamed. Trump exploded. He slammed his palm against the desk microphones, jumping from the impact. "This is a lie. That man doesn't exist. I never missed a test in my life." His voice cracked not from volume, but from fear. The kind that smells like a sinking ship. But Jasmine, she stayed still, eyes forward, hands folded. Because when a man builds his empire on genius, what happens when the nation finds out he never took the test? Trump was still fuming. Cheeks red, jaw clenched like a man trying to outrun a landslide he'd started himself. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She waited exactly 5 beats, then reached for another document, this time crisp, pristine, modern. She didn't hold it up. She slid it under the overhead display where every camera in America could see it. "This," she said quietly, "is the academic transcript Mr. Trump's campaign circulated in 2016 and again during the 2020 election." The screen lit up with clean type letter grades, class titles, and a bold heading, Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. It looked perfect until Jasmine lifted her pen and tapped once hard on a single line. "Global Economics R4, she read aloud. "This course did not exist in 1966. Not in Wharton, not anywhere." Gasps didn't erupt. They coiled beneath the silence. Some staffers instinctively leaned closer, as if reading it themselves might make the lie vanish. But it didn't. She tapped again. "Strategic Business Modeling," she added. "Another course that wouldn't be introduced until 1984. Her voice wasn't angry. It was surgical, each word cutting cleaner than the last. "That's 2 ghost classes in a single semester on a transcript used to justify credentials for the highest office in this country." Trump scoffed, trying to laugh, but it came out brittle hollow. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked straight into the camera where millions were now watching, leaning forward. Because this wasn't just a typo. It was a blueprint of a lie dressed up in ink and arrogance. And Jasmine Crockett had just cracked the first brick in the wall. Jasmine didn't pause. She pivoted with precision like a prosecutor mid-case and nodded toward the side door. It creaked open. A tall, thin man in a charcoal suit entered, carrying a leather folio like it contained state secrets. His name was Dr. Eli Brenner, credential analyst, Ivy League consultant, and forensic document expert. And he wasn't here to speculate. He adjusted his glasses and placed a printout beneath the document camera. "My team conducted a typographic and temporal analysis of the transcript submitted," he began. His voice was calm, clinical. "The font used, Garamond Premiere Pro, was not released until 1989. It is a digital typeface. It did not exist in 1966, nor was it available on any typewriter or printing press in use by the University of Pennsylvania at that time. It was the kind of statement that didn't need volume to shake the room. You could feel it like a sudden drop in barometric pressure." Reporters froze mid-keystroke. A legal aide dropped their notepad. And from the far right corner of the chamber, Jim Jordan leaned forward, whispering through clenched teeth. "How did she get this?" Trump stared at the screen, blinking hard as if he could unsee the evidence. His lips parted, but no words came. For a man who'd built his image on polished power and paperwork, it was the paper itself now betraying him. Jasmine stood motionless, letting the silence eat through his defenses. Because it wasn't just the font that was fake, it was the entire foundation. And the ink had finally started to bleed. Dr. Brenner wasn't finished. He placed a second image on the screen this time, a close-up of the university's official seal pulled directly from the transcript Trump's campaign had paraded for years. "We ran a digital trace of the registrar's stamp," he said, his voice colder now. "It's pixel-based, a PNG overlay. There are inconsistencies in the kerning, and the seal's alignment doesn't match any official university formatting used before 2005. Jasmine stepped in her finger, hovering just above the seal, like it might smudge beneath truth. "It wasn't stamped," she said. "It was pasted." The word cut through the air like a razor across canvas. Not loud, but final. The lie hadn't just been written, it had been edited. Trump lurched forward, red-faced and trembling with forced laughter. "So fonts are political now," he barked. "You're going to put me on trial over a typewriter." But his voice cracked mid-sentence, exposing something he couldn't spin: panic. Not fury, not outrage, fear. Jasmine didn't take the bait. She looked at him only once, brief, razor-sharp. "Not the typewriter," she said. "The forgery." And then she turned back to the evidence, letting the cameras drink it in frame by frame. Because when a man lies about his grades, it's ego. When he lies about the paper that got him power, it's fraud. And in that moment, one question rolled through the chamber like thunder behind marble. If the degree is fake, is the presidency too? The room was still reeling from the forged transcript when Jasmine reached for something far more dangerous, because it wasn't about Trump this time. It was about someone no one in that chamber had ever heard of. She lifted a second envelope older than the first, its corners softened. By time its ink faded but intact. The camera zoomed tighter. No one blinked. This letter, she said, her voice steady but lower now, was dated June 11, 1964. It's from the Wharton School's admissions committee, addressed to one Mr. Elliot Harmon of Queens, New York. She laid it flat on the table where the overhead camera caught every wrinkle, every word. His SAT score was 1420, higher than the national average, higher than the score Donald Trump never actually earned. Murmurs stirred like wind through dry leaves. Jasmine didn't react. She turned the letter slightly toward the screen, tapping the final line at the bottom, written not in typewriter ink but in pen. A note left by an admissions officer never meant to be seen. 4 words. Too many quotas filled. Too risky. The air vanished from the room. Gone. Erased. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an erasure. Not because of grades. Not because of merit. But because of skin. Trump shifted in his seat, but this time he didn't speak. Even Green fell silent. Jim Jordan rubbed his temple like the headache had finally landed. Jasmine looked down at the letter and then slowly raised her eyes to the room. This seat was never empty, she said. It was stolen before he ever got to sit in it. And now, 60 years later, it was finally speaking back. Jasmine didn't rush the next move. She tapped her tablet once and the overhead screen came alive. No fanfare, no graphics. Just a living room bathed in warm afternoon light and a woman sitting on a worn leather couch, hands clasped lips, trembling eyes already glassed with grief. Her name appeared in the corner of the screen, Danielle Harmon, daughter of Elliot Harmon. Her voice cracked before the first full sentence. My dad, he thought he failed. She paused, swallowing the weight of a lifetime. He thought maybe his essay wasn't good enough. Maybe he said something wrong in the interview. He never knew. Her voice broke completely. He never knew he was replaced before they even opened his folder. The room didn't stir. Not one chair creaked. Not one aide whispered. You could feel the shame thick in the air, not the kind you argue with, the kind you carry. Danielle wiped a tear not out of weakness, but because it kept her words from drowning. He drove a bus in Queens for 32 years. He smiled every morning. He stayed up late helping me with algebra. And all that time he carried this quiet, like maybe he just wasn't enough. A sob escaped her lips, brief, human, unstoppable. But he was more than enough. They just never gave him the chance to be seen. Nobody dared lift their eyes, not Jordan, not Green, not even Trump. Because this wasn't politics anymore. This was the voice of the boy who'd been erased, echoing back through the voice of his daughter. And for the first time in the hearing, the silence didn't just sting, it bled. The screen faded to black, but the weight of Danielle's voice lingered like smoke after a fire. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She let the stillness settle, let every heartbeat in the room remember what it had just heard. Then she stood slow and steady and placed her hand back on Elliot Harmon's letter, like she was anchoring it to the earth so no one could bury it again. Donald Trump didn't just lie, she said, eyes sweeping the room. He erased someone. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It cut. Elliot Harmon had the grades. He had the discipline. He had the dream. But he didn't have the name. The chamber stayed frozen. Green stared at her pen like it might save her. Jordan looked at the floor like it might disappear. Trump sat rigid, jaw tight, but for once silent. Because Jasmine hadn't exposed a forgery. She had unearthed a crime. One that didn't steal money. One that stole belonging. She turned to the chairman, then to the cameras, then back to the letter. This piece of paper isn't just a rejection, she said. It's a gravestone for an opportunity that never got to breathe. Then she looked straight into the lens, right through America. How many names, she whispered, did we never know? Because his was already written in ink. The question didn't seek an answer. It demanded a reckoning. And the silence that followed wasn't heavy with guilt. It was crushed beneath it. Jasmine didn't sit. She didn't even blink. She tapped once more on her tablet and the chamber lights dimmed slightly as the overhead screen flared back to life. This time it wasn't a document. It was a reel. A string of public appearances, campaign rallies, interviews, town halls. But the words never changed. Clip 1, Trump at a podium, voice booming, Maxine Waters, very low IQ. Clip 2, a smirk, a sneer. AOC doesn't know what she's talking about. Low IQ. Clip 3, laughter behind him as he mocks Ilhan Omar disaster. She's just not smart. Clip 4, Jasmine Crockett's name muttered into a hot mic, traffic court IQ. Doesn't belong in Congress. Clip 5, a town hall in Florida. Trump arms flailing, voice sharp. That CNN anchor, low IQ. She reads the news like a second grader. The audience laughed, but the reporter didn't. Her eyes held the weight of every woman in media who'd been laughed at instead of listened to. The audio wasn't subtle, it was surgical, and it hit harder because it was familiar. The room didn't gasp this time. It absorbed, like a wound being reopened with a scalpel carved from memory. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice low but rising with each word. This isn't improvisation, she said. It's choreography. This isn't spontaneous, it's scripted. When he feels threatened by a woman of color who stands her ground, this is his reflex. She paused, then delivered it sharp and clean. It's not an insult, it's a ritual. A ripple moved through the room, not of outrage, but of realization. Reporters stopped typing and just stared. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Because this wasn't just about her, or Maxine, or AOC, or Ilhan. It was a pattern, deliberate, rehearsed, repeated. And Jasmine had just held up a mirror to the nation. Now the question was, who else had gotten used to looking away? The screen went black, but the echoes of Trump's voice lingered like a stain in the air. Jasmine let the silence breathe just enough for the pattern to settle in every corner of the room. Then she stepped closer to the mic, not to shout, but to carve. Low IQ doesn't mean dumb, she said, her voice sharp, deliberate. It means dangerous. To him. She paused, eyes locked forward, scanning the faces that suddenly couldn't meet hers. He doesn't call us low IQ because we lack intelligence. He does it because we threaten the illusion that his power is earned. No one moved. Even the Republican aides, so quick to chuckle earlier, stared straight ahead, chins, low eyes frozen. Jasmine's voice didn't rise, but it tightened like wire around a lie. He uses that slur on women who won't shrink, who won't sit down, women of color who refuse to be props in his performance. She turned slightly, gaze sweeping the gallery, then the dais. He didn't say it to me because I was off topic. He said it because I was on target, and he couldn't out-argue me, so he tried to reduce me. She let that hang in the air, slicing through decades of repetition. In a country that often confused cruelty for cleverness, Jasmine Crockett had just decoded the tactic in real time. It wasn't random. It was ritualistic. And for once, the weapon had been turned back toward its wielder. Because now the question wasn't what he called them. It was why so many let him get away with it. Jasmine didn't pace. She didn't point. She just stood still like a pillar carved from everything he couldn't control. The screen behind her no longer showed images, but somehow the silence was louder than all the clips combined. Because it wasn't about one insult anymore. It was about the pattern, the pathology, the playbook. She never called me stupid, Jasmine finally said. She never called AOC stupid. He did. Her tone wasn't angry. It was surgical, peeling back layers of power that had gone unchallenged for decades. It's not a reflex. It's a formula. She lifted a printed list, one-page, double columns, name after name. Women, all women of color, all labeled by Trump in one form or another as unqualified, angry, dangerous, or low IQ. This isn't political strategy, she said. It's identity warfare wrapped in a smirk and handed out like candy to anyone who laughs with him. Trump shifted in his seat, arms crossed, lips sucked inward. The cameras caught every twitch. Because Jasmine wasn't just confronting a man, she was confronting the system that protected him. She wasn't just answering for herself, she was answering for every woman who had to swallow her brilliance just to stay in the room. And in that moment, with a stack of quotes and a voice like steady fire, she did something rare in politics. She held up a mirror and made the nation look into it. What if every insult wasn't random but rehearsed, and worse, What if we've heard it so many times? We stopped noticing. The hearing room hadn't taken a breath in minutes. Jasmine reached beneath her stack of papers and raised something unexpected, simple, stark, and devastating. A foam core board white background, bold black letters, Article 1, Section 6. The room tilted as if gravity itself had just shifted toward her. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. This is the Constitution, she said, each syllable clean as glass. This is the law you swore to uphold. And this is the one you chose to ignore when you told me to sit down, genius. A ripple passed through the dais. Not a gasp, not yet, but the subtle movement of people realizing they had just watched someone step into history. Jasmine's hand didn't shake. Her words didn't race. She read directly from the clause, the one designed to protect members of Congress from retaliation for speech made in session. It says, "I have the right to speak here," she continued. And it says, "No one, not a president, not a judge, not a loud man with a fragile ego can punish me for it." Trump blinked too hard. The cameras caught it. The networks clipped it. Jasmine didn't just invoke law. She became it, unbending, immovable, undeniable. Because in that moment, she wasn't defending herself. She was defending every woman who'd been silenced, interrupted, dismissed, and dared to answer back. Now the room had to choose, respect the Constitution, or keep pretending it didn't apply when the speaker was a black woman. The board was still upright behind her, a wall of law standing taller than any insult ever thrown her way. But Jasmine didn't speak like a lawyer now. She spoke like a woman who had bled truth through every wound of her journey. Her voice dipped low, not to soften, but to anchor. "I didn't sit down for myself," she said, eyes sweeping past the cameras and into the nation's living rooms. "I stood for every girl who was told she was too loud, too black, too much." Each word landed like a bell toll, echoing beyond the hearing room's cold walls. A pause. Not for effect, but for memory. For the ones who raised their hands and got laughed at, who spoke up and were labeled aggressive, who wore their hair natural and got told it was unprofessional, who knew the answer but were never called on. She didn't blink. She didn't tremble. Her tone stayed ironed flat, the kind that made even the powerful feel exposed. "You didn't just tell me to sit. You told every girl watching that her voice didn't belong here." And with that, she raised her chin, not in defiance but in dedication. To the daughters watching from broken school systems, to the mothers who had to shrink in office meetings, to the women who had been told that silence was safer. In that chair on that day, Jasmine didn't just break a rule. She broke a cycle. And now the question wasn't whether she'd stood, it was who else would dare to rise with her. For 3 full seconds, the room didn't move. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just the sound of breath being remembered. Then, like glass cracking under pressure, it broke. A thunderclap of applause erupted from the back rows. One member stood, then another, then another. The air didn't just shift, it ignited. What Jasmine had done wasn't theatrical. It was tectonic. No screaming, no slogans. Just the weight of undeniable truth planted like a flag in the center of the storm. Even the cameras shook from the volume of hands, colliding of shoes stomping the marble floor. Trump's lips parted, but no words came. His hands twitched like they wanted to reach for something, power, control, and insult, but found only air. The louder the applause grew, the smaller he seemed. Jasmine didn't bow. She didn't nod. She just stood, shoulders square, eyes steady, as if she'd been carved out of the very Constitution behind her. This wasn't just vindication. It was revelation. Behind her, the phrase on Article 1 on Section 6 shimmered in the soft glow of the monitors. No longer legal jargon, but a battle cry. For everyone who had ever been talked over, laughed at, told to be less. And as the ovation thundered toward its peak, a single electrifying question cut through the noise. What if the most powerful act in politics was simply not sitting down? The hearing had ended, but the tremors were just beginning. Twitter wasn't trending. It was detonating. Hashtags spiraled into a digital wildfire. "Sit down girl, Crockett strikes back, IQ gate." Every network scrambled for reruns. CNN replayed the moment Jasmine rose like a verdict on loop, each frame dissected like it was history, caught red-handed. She broke him without raising her voice, one anchor whispered, barely believing the playback. Fox tried to spin it, but even their panelists looked dazed like they just watched gravity flip. MSNBC's Kyron didn't mince words. IQ test backfires. Crockett dismantles. Trump live. Clips ricocheted through TikTok and YouTube like tracer fire. Teenagers, teachers, veterans, grandmothers, they didn't just watch, they reacted. Stitch after stitch opened with Jasmine's calm stare and ended with fists in the air. A single still of her, standing silent, unstoppable, became the image of the hour, the day, the year. And Trump, he vanished. No press walk, no tweet, no tantrum, just silence. The one thing he never chose now forced upon him like a mirror too bright to face. Jasmine Crockett hadn't shouted, she hadn't stormed, she hadn't played their game, and somehow that made her louder than anyone else in the room. But as the world leaned forward to hear more, one question began circling like thunder above the storm. Was this the end of a lie or just the beginning of a reckoning? Long after the applause faded and the headlines cooled, Jasmine stepped out into the sunlight. No cameras, no microphones, just the hush of something bigger than politics. That's when she saw her, a girl maybe 10 hair in braids, eyes burning with a fire too old for her age. She broke through the crowd, feet barely touching pavement, and threw her arms around Jasmine's waist like she was holding on to a future that had almost slipped away. "I want to speak like you someday," the girl whispered into Jasmine's coat. Jasmine knelt eye-level, grounding the moment. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried the same steel, the same stillness that had stopped a president cold. "You already do," she said. "The moment you refuse to be silent, that's when they start to hear you." The crowd around them stilled again, not for drama, but for reverence. Reporters lowered their phones. Staffers blinked like they'd forgotten how to breathe. In that instant, the hearing, the chaos, the lies, they all dissolved. What remained was one truth spoken without force, but felt like thunder. This wasn't just about Trump. It never was. It was about every girl who had been told to quiet down. Every student overlooked. Every voice buried beneath privilege and power. And as Jasmine rose, hand in the little girl's, the question hanging in the air no longer needed an answer. It had become one. She stood beneath the chamber lights alone, but anything but small. Her fingers hovered over the final file, a plain manila folder, still sealed, still silent. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The weight of everything already spoken filled the air like a gavel yet to fall. Trump sat slumped, his hands limp, the heat drained from his glare. Around him the room was frozen, not in fear, but in revelation. Jasmine looked once to the chairman, once to the clock, then back to the people, the millions still watching beyond the lens. "I yield my time," she said, voice even unwavering, echoing through every hallway and home it reached. "But I will never yield my worth." And then she stepped back, not down. The folder remained untouched, daring the next liar to test her silence again. The camera zoomed in for one last frame, her eyes forward, her shoulders unshaken, her presence louder than any mic in the room. The screen faded to black. No music, no applause, just breathless quiet. But outside the silence in living rooms, classrooms, courthouses, the story kept moving. Not because it ended, but because Jasmine Crockett proved something no headline could contain. Some women sit down, some women rise, and some rewrite the whole damn room. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to be heard, you just need to stand when silence would be easier and let the truth speak for itself. Jasmine didn't close the story with anger, but with a sentence that made a nation stop and reflect. Have you ever stood your ground even when the world expected you to shrink? Share your moment, because your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to find their own. If this story stirred something in you, don't just scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where quiet courage becomes a national reckoning. Hit the bell, because the next story won't just uncover a lie. It might reclaim a truth we forgot. What moment made you stop and feel something real? Drop a comment below. Let's not just witness history. Let's carry it forward together. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. The truth isn't finished, it's just waiting. for someone brave enough to listen and bold enough to speak.